if I wanted to implement like Nazball with like Maoist characteristics or something, like I could like get some Hoon developers to like whip that up with me or what?
Yeah. So that's the way we're planning it out.
Based.
Yeah.
Like fake Twitter bio political alignment you can imagine.
This is so much cooler than NFT profile pics. All right, what's up, everybody? This is Other Life. I am Justin Murphy. I just wanted to let you know that I write a free newsletter to thousands of people every week. It's where I publish my best work, I share events that you can come to, and much more. We have an insane private community around the newsletter, and it's free. Go check it out. Just go to otherlife.co. That's otherlife.co. When you subscribe, I'm going to send you a folder of PDFs that contain all of my personal highlights from a bunch of my favorite books that I've read over the years. So you'll get a million insights after just a few minutes of browsing these PDFs, really. They're really special to me, and I just figured I'd share them with you all. So that's otherlife.co, otherlife.co. All right, everybody. Other Life Podcast. I'm Justin Murphy. I'm here in the office of Assembly Capital in Austin. I'm hanging out with Anthony Arroyo on my left here and Trent on my right. Trent is the founder of a new startup that's being built on Urbit. Yes, that's right. Startups are being built on Urbit. Development is happening much faster than you would realize. That's why I'm doing all these interviews, because it's just really exciting times. So specifically, Trent is building a startup on Urbit that is providing DAO tooling, basically, because the futuristic communities are going to be built on Urbit, not on fucking Discord, because Discord is just, come on. So I want to go. We're gonna talk all about DAOs and what to expect in the near future of Urbit. The interesting opinions that you have around, how you got into all of this, why this is so interesting and exciting to you. And Anthony, as the guy leading up the Combine and kind of leading up the different startup ventures being built on Urbit, will just be kind of here to hang out. And
hype man,
and he'll contribute 2 cents.
Booth girl / hype man.
Whenever he wants. So yeah, I think maybe the best place to start is I looked at mock-ups of the tooling that you're building, and you're calling the Urbit version of DAOs colonies. Give the audience just a sketch of what you're building exactly and what it's going to look like for different human organizations and communities to build sophisticated crypto-enabled coordination mechanisms on Urbit.
Okay, thanks, Justin. Yeah. So the startup, our startup's called Holium, and really the vision that we have is it really started with kind of just realizing how bad the DAO experience it was currently online. Oh, we'll get closer.
Right.
So yeah, part of that is that everything's in Discord, right? So you have like 1,000 channels that are all for different things and all this stuff. You have various apps spread across different things, different services. You have like Snapshot for voting. You might have your treasury on Gnosis Safe, or you might have it in some other mechanism or some other platform. But there's all these different places that you would go to sort of engage in a DAO. And then beyond that, you have file sharing. You've got like a Notion for all your docs, or you've got a forum like randomly spun up somewhere. So it's all very discombobulated. It's all over the place.
It sucks.
It's disjointed.
Is what you're saying. It sucks.
It just sucks. It just sucks. Yes, it's horrible.
Technical term.
And this is the reason why like Urbit is going to be, I think, the most ideal place to do DAOs. And it's because it has the ID layer built in, which is one important thing. So because one thing is like, when you're on a DAO right now and everyone's account name is just like 0xF11 or whatever,
right? And there's like 10,000 fake Vitaliks.
yeah, and there's so many. Yeah. I mean, now they have the cool ENS stuff now, but I still think that there's something that needs to be done in terms of the overall experience, and like all this stuff's on Web 2 right now. Like, I mean, I think Snapshot for voting and all these other things have like the blockchain integrations and stuff, but really, like, how can you build sort of these decentralized organizations of the future if you're just like using Discord, right? Or you're using whatever, Google Chat or something.
That's obviously not the end point of all of this.
Wasn't there some DAO that whose Discord got hacked and the whole thing just collapsed? And you're like,
oh really?
Bro.
Well, Anthony, so from your perspective as the guy kind of leading startup efforts on Urbit, How do you see this as a priority for Urbit, the moving of DAOs from Discord onto Urbit? Like, how do you think about that from a kind of business development perspective and from a network development perspective?
Okay. Anybody who knows anything about Urbit knows that sometimes we talk about some space age shit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like we talk about some space age shit, the blood computer, the full levitating, rotating orb computer. Yeah.
Let's go.
This is not that.
Okay.
This is like the most pragmatic thing in the world, as far as I'm concerned.
Right. Like a lot of people need it now.
DAOs exist.
Right.
The experience sucks. We have a general purpose computer that's connected to the internet that has an ID layer that you own cryptographically. It's like, let's fucking go.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? This is not, so to me, this is a no-brainer.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, there's a lot of nuance, right? I think, right now, the DAO experience, there's a lot of stuff that people use chains for. Maybe they don't need to use chains. There's like, there's sort of like, where do those lines draw? But the use case is there. And I think once you add like DeFi DAOs, people who are trying to do sort of like actively do financial stuff as well, and then you have a recipe for, okay, this is something that Urbit is actually superior. This is not like Urbit is superior if you buy into our whole thing. This is like a thing where we can provide a superior experience.
Right.
So to me, this is actually kind of a no-brainer.
Right.
I mean, it's funny. Josh, Warref, and I at the foundation sitting there talking about, DAO's cool, whatever. Like this is our thesis, and then like, Trent literally like drops out of the sky and like, comes to assembly. He had this idea that was sort of like, I think Polkadot, where you were looking at.
Built on Polkadot.
Yeah, and he's like, he comes in, sees what we got going on. And he's like, oh shit, So this is like synchronicity is real. This is
and we even were like, we had gotten rolling. Like we had a peer-to-peer chat that we kind of had built. Because our whole ethos at the beginning was like, it's got to be peer-to-peer or else it's just, of another fucking Discord, right? So we had done quite a bit of work, but then I sort of made this decision that it makes so much sense to sort of take all the ideas and leave the actual code behind.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just for this. And because like everything is already kind of built with Urbit. And I think for us is it's like there's this technical challenge of building all this stuff, right? Like peer-to-peer databases that work and, somehow have persistence outside of like, a bunch of people's devices that are running this thing, right? So like, how does all that work? And kind of is already solved with a lot of stuff Urbit was doing. So for me, I was like, actually, it's going to be a lot easier in the long run if we build it on Urbit versus
and you could focus on
ourselves.
the product questions and like making a good UX and it being as opposed to solving all the reboiling the ocean basically.
Right. So basically the attractions of Urbit are manifold, but it sounds like the big ones would be, you already mentioned the identity system, having a peer-to-peer identity and messaging system baked in to the platform that you're building on, but also having crypto primitives, right? Like there's already a Bitcoin wallet. There's probably going to be other wallets built into Urbit chips. Having all of that and messaging in one place, it basically just kind of makes Urbit the no-brainer for the real DAOs of the future.
Yeah, I think it makes it a no-brainer. And for us, like all we really have to do is just kind of take what you guys have started with the whole Urbit project in terms of like
just make it better. Just make it work.
And just make essentially like we're gonna make this new unified experience that does tie all those things together that I mentioned earlier, which is like you have to go there for this and all this, and it's like you have 15 different services that you're running a DAO on, whereas in this it's like one place. You have one place. You go into that place. You can have all the DAOs that you would want to be a part of on it. The experience is you have chat. You've got like a wiki. You've got this cool new, like kind of DAO Google News sort of thing. You've got all these ideas that are pulling all this data together that you're not going to get anywhere else. And part of it is like we want to be able to sort of maximize that collaborative factor of DAOs because that's I think really where if you can unlock that collaboration layer like in all of these DAOs. That's when you can start seeing really cool stuff happening.
Okay, awesome. So let's paint a picture for people watching and listening about what this is actually going to look like concretely. So I believe Holium is looking to ship a working version sometime this year. And tell us in concrete detail, like what are what are the variables? What are the primitives that are going to be involved in the colony software on Urbit? I know that there's communities may have their own cryptocurrencies. There are going to be governance options, different types of governance structures. For people who are already familiar with DAOs, it's kind of a competitor system to the current stack of like the Discord bots that check for ERC20 holdings in MetaMask. I believe the colony software that you're building is basically going to be kind of an alternative or superior version of that stack, but it has some interesting opinions baked into it around the different governance types. Just tell us at a high level, what are the moving parts of the colony as you're building it?
Sure. Well, really, I could just give you sort of the tentative roadmap.
Okay.
And obviously with, it seems like notorious around the Urbit space that things tend to take longer than you expect, but I'm hoping to try to find a way to make that make an exception for that. But so it really starts with the first app we're going to be working on is this voting app. And our first version of this voting app is going to be, at first it's not going to be blockchain, like not be connected to a blockchain. It's going to be sort of like for groups that you're currently using. So like if you're part of a group, you could get in and do, vote on, some stupid polls or something about like, do I like cats or dogs better or whatever the case is, or like, whatever you want to vote on. So that would be like version 1. And then version 2 of that voting app is going to be, enabled with probably Ethereum integration or Akbar, which is the native blockchain that's being built for Urbit. And one of the things that's going to happen is there's going to be an action that could be triggered at the end of that. So if you do a vote, an action might be, ban this person from the chat or kick them from the chat. Or it could be like, in the future when we build out the rest of the modules, which I'll list out here in a second, it would be like, pay this person through the treasury, right? So really the modules that we're going to be working on.
Oh, cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
It's kind of like smart contract functionality, but because of Urbit's design, you don't actually need this overkill smart contract bullshit. Yes, right?
Exactly.
That's awesome. That's cool.
I think the way that we're sort of seeing it is that you really need it for that financials layer, like a lot of the financial stuff. So like treasury stuff we'll probably need to do on chain. But like some of the other stuff, you might not need to do everything.
But it's still programmatic and it's still kind of irreversible and immutable, right?
Yeah, like the final state would be stored in some way on a chain. But all of this intermediary
for the non-chain stuff, that stuff that doesn't need to go, like booting a member. If everyone agrees that we boot a member, it's like
stuff like that. It doesn't need to be on the
rules.
chain.
If the rules are defined by the community to be a majority vote determines if someone gets kicked, and then a vote goes through and a majority determines person X gets kicked, he gets kicked. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, right? It goes through with a programmatic, a hardcore kind of programmatic logic, but it's not a smart contract.
Yeah, and so this is, I think, something that's very interesting, and one of the benefits of, your Urbit is an entire computer. It is not an account, right? I mean, this is the thing that I think we're so used to, like accounts, that we forget that an Urbit is an entire computer, which means that based on this vote, any action that a computer can take can be triggered. That's kind of an amazing thing to think about, right? Like you literally could have a vote and it could just nuke the ship, or I mean, don't do that, right? But it's sort of like that, and so like we think about things like, display the results of this vote is just actually a command. It's just a function, running a function, right? But that function could be pay this person, it could be ban this person, it could be things we could never even imagine. Right. So you even just within the small thing of voting, right? You have the ability of like, collaborative computing, basically.
Right.
Like,
Awesome.
should we, and just like it could be trivial things, and it could be, like I said, things that we can't even imagine.
Yeah, that's a cool initial product. That's cool. Okay. So go on.
That's going to be the first thing. And then after that, we sort of have, like, we really think that through this first app that we're building, we're going to learn all the lessons we need to sort of get the speed and the churn out for some of these other features. And that's going to be like this thing we call treasury, which is just the treasury. It's like Gnosis Safe, essentially. Like the design, which I'll show you guys later, is essentially just like Gnosis Safe, but like on Urbit. And then we have this thing called the Foundry. And the Foundry really is just this app that we're going to launch that is kind of like if you've used Aragon's DAO creation tool, it's kind of like that, where you just go through this workflow or this wizard, I guess, and you can choose all these settings. You can choose your governance type. You can like choose the sort of, the app of the people that are founding it. So it's be like you, and you want to, launch this token and split it between you and this other guy. You'd be able to just type in the name, it completes. And that's the kind of the cool stuff about building on Urbit, is that you're sort of tied to an identity when you're doing these things. So you go through this process, you define your token supply, whether you're using it for like governance or reputation or whatever. And then you could go and choose the governance type. And we have, we have this interesting thing where we want to enable all sorts of different governance. So we even have an option for monarchy, and really
benign monarchy.
And what does that mean? Just like a single user decides everything?
Yeah. It could be. You could just think of it as like a traditional corporation kind of.
Okay,
right?
yeah, with the CEO who
like with
calls
the
the shots.
Yeah, or like sort of absolute monarchy sort of thing can be done as well. Where, but I think
is communism an option?
One person DAO.
Yes, yeah, and someone suggested
DAO.
Yeah, someone suggested in one of our public colony initiative group on Urbit that bureaucracy. You should put bureaucracy on. I was like, who? Like, just imagine being the person who's like, I want to choose bureaucracy for my governance.
Yeah,
type.
I'm like
you
a
ban
German,
that guy? Like banned.
some like German Prussian guy in like a navy blue like collared coat comes in and is like, bureaucracy, please.
Exactly. License, please. Bureaucracy license, please.
But I think making it flexible to sort of enable people to try, really dumb ideas. So you learn why they're bad, right?
So it's arbitrary. The people can potentially design different governance systems to an arbitrarily wide degree. So like if I wanted to implement like Nazball with like Maoist characteristics or something, like I could like get some Hoon developers to like whip that up with me or what?
Yeah. So that's the way we're planning it out.
Based.
Any like fake Twitter bio political alignment you can imagine.
This is so much cooler than NFT profile pics.
Well, it's the cool thing about Urbit, right? So if you wanted to make those changes, like you can, pull down the desk. You can go. We're going to have a directory for this, and it's going to define all the different rules for governance. And you could just write your own file called like, I don't know, like Maoist, like future,
right.
whatever.
Maoist futurism.
Futurism, yeah. Or whatever. Like,
I'm in.
The whole thing is we want to build it to be flexible because a lot of things with DAOs have to be flexible, right? So I think our sort of methodology is we're going to build it with this sort of limited scope so we get something done. But we want to build each of these pieces so that if you have a capability of Hoon, you have a developer that can do Hoon, you could come in, you could add your stuff, you could build whatever system you want. So we're trying to make it be as open as possible.
Got it.
In that way.
Let me just point something out here. So one of the things about Urbit that's really unique, right, is that exactly what someone else is. That someone else, all network participants are running knock. Okay. So that means that I can basically make assumptions about other people's ships and the performance of those ships that you can't make on the traditional internet, right? And so this is actually what you think about why smart contracts exist. A lot of that is to provide this sort of like base layer of agreement, right? On like what is the structure of this agreement. And so what's interesting about Urbit and about just the way that our stack is constructed is you get a lot of those guarantees without a smart contract. So we can basically think about how, okay, I want to have an agreed upon way of governing. I want to be able to look at the rules, for lack of a better term, right? Well, we think about having a solidity contract as being the way you do that. Well, we could also do it the way that we're doing it, right? And we all know that we all write Hoon. We all know Hoon. Most of us know Hoon, right? So you can pull it down and you can just see what someone's doing. You can even see the compiled knock and know that's what's running. And that's, I think, what's interesting is a lot of these problems have been solved assuming a blockchain, and you don't need a blockchain for a lot of this stuff. You need Urbit.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit more about some crazy futuristic shit and how like Urbit is going to,
pragmatism.
like overthrow the global techno-commercial mega machine. I mean, I believe that's kind of how you got into Urbit,
that's
right?
Actually Q2.
That's the Q2 release.
That's kind of how you got into this world and this ecosystem. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your perspective on, just because I believe you were building like commercial AI systems for big oil companies. Is that right? Something like that?
Yeah.
Tell us like about that story about what you were doing and how the kind of how you got Urbit built, basically.
Yeah. So essentially, what was it? In 2017, or it was 2016. I was working at GE and I got involved in these AI projects in oil and gas. And at the time I was in Canada, I wanted to stay in Canada. You know, my boss in the US was pulling me back to come back to GE US. And I just quit. And with these two guys, we started building up this AI company. We were doing a lot of cool projects. We were working with Calgary Flames. We were using like graph theory simulations to like see how this player was going to, you know, impact the stats and like the total number of wins for the different seasons. So like we would take a player off, put them on and stuff like that. And you would be able to see like, oh, now they this whole season they score like, you know, whatever, 70 points or whatever versus like 50. Those numbers are probably very off. Anyways, then we went to, you know, work with big oil companies. We beat IBM on a contract actually, which was
Do you
hilarious.
get a plaque for that?
No, you don't get a plaque, but you know, it was fun to sort of like win and then just sort of like drop the mic and leave, like
Not
in
do
this
the
sort
work.
of like meeting. Yeah, and then
Anti-work.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. It was
So you're getting these massive contracts. You're drinking champagne. You're kicking back, and you're like,
Yeah.
"Fuck, I'm building Skynet."
Yeah.
Is that like what's kind of going on
Yeah,
here?
it's pretty much that. Yeah, it was like, okay, so there was this moment where we were pitching to this big oil company. Like, we had already gotten this pretty big project with them, and we're like, this is going to be the next 5 years with you, like if you work with us. And we were pitching this, you know, these meta models. We would stack all these models. So you'd have like, you know, the well model, this sort of oil field model. You'd have like the division model, and eventually you'd have like CEO model. We didn't pitch that to the CEO, but like the idea was that, you know, you could keep doing this sort of like stacking or whatever, and obviously it would never work. But you know,
Slides look good though. I bet.
yeah, there was some great slides, like a few boxes, a lot of boxes. Yeah, just stacking them. But then like you start to realize, like as you extrapolate out, like people were actually building this. Like they were like, yeah, let's do it. We love it. You know, it's like everyone's aiming for this future. And then like suddenly I started to realize, wow, this sucks. Like imagine a future where like everything is automated. And it started having this sort of like soul searching where I was like, I felt like I was sick or whatever. Like I felt like I was going through this process of like, it's sort of like the hero's journey bit where like you have to sort of go through the death and rebirth cycle, and then you come out the other side and you start learning all this stuff. And sort of that was this process of realizing that the future that we were building with this sort of AI overlord idea was going to be one that was going to be totally lacking freedom and things like that. So then I started like thinking about, okay, so how do you stop this from happening? Like, how do you stop this train? So I was like, in a very futile way, I was like, okay, what if we like bind humanity to AI in some way? So like the paperclip problem doesn't like destroy all humans, you know, like, so how do you like make it like, how can
Try to lean in first. You
yeah,
leaned in.
it's like, what can you do? Like, what if you like legislate that, you know, only AI hardware could run on devices that are attached to people? Or like, wow, you start like thinking about like this stuff.
Holium
Like,
Right, you're trying to
V1.
solve the problem by going deeper into the problem in a way, right? It's a natural way to think about it.
yeah. So like, because I kind of felt like it was happening, right? So then, you know, it's like you're taking all this off because this was like our whole ethos, right? And I was going through like the spiritual awakening of like, let's actually make the pro-human future. So then that led me to all these different projects, peer-to-peer, sort of like, you know, not like having Google have like some server that's running your computer and you just get a screen or whatever. Like you need to have like full ownership over things. You need like privacy. You need all these pieces. So just starting to realize that, you know, this is the way of the future, you know, if you want to build the pro-human future. So then, you know, after like a year of me sort of like going through this journey of unraveling all that stuff, I came across Urbit. Like it's probably like a year and a half
ago.
And a lot of the ideas around Urbit, I think, I like the sort of way they were, like you guys described a lot of the stuff in terms of like, you know, you call out Megacorp, like in some of your documents about, you know, these are sort of evil overlords that are sort of just extracting from you. And part of the thing that I sort of thought through is this idea where, you know, it's like, imagine you have like 10 units of like mental capacity a day, and like half of it's used for work, and like some of it's used for like, you know, the tasks of life. And then there's like this leftover bit, and that leftover bit could be used for self-actualization and like really good stuff. But like you have all of these companies that their goal is to maximize that and take that away and make it consumption, right? And so that you're just, clicking like and looking at ads, or you're like watching something and looking at ads or whatever. And you start to realize that this whole future is horrible. So like I wanted the opposite of that. And getting involved with, or just getting, like a planet on Urbit was great because it sort of was this ethos of the calm computing and all that, right? So anyways, I was with like playing around the Urbit space. I was going through all the sort of decentralization, blockchain stuff, seeing that there is something there that was more pro-human. And then, there was a network breach and I lost all the Urbit stuff. Like all of my stuff reset, and I was like, you know what, screw this. I'm gonna go off for a bit, and I sort of just put it in the back seat and went off and did other things for a while. And then I started building this sort of peer-to-peer thing. At the beginning, it was the beginning of 2021 when I started it. So I started from the very bottom, like at the libp2p level, building on top of that, building a little peer-to-peer database so you could chat through all the stuff. And then I started checking back in with Urbit around summertime. And as soon as I saw you guys had assembly, I signed up for it, right? Because I was curious to see because you were going to announce some stuff around like software distribution and stuff like that. So I was like, okay, let's see. Because I was like struggling through like building some of this stuff. Yeah. Like I was like building a sort of identity system on Polkadot where you just have this sort of chain that you're registering these identities onto, stuff like that. And it was just like, I was just like, man, this is a lot. So when I went to assembly and I saw the software distribution and I saw like a lot had happened, I realized, man, I gotta pivot onto this. And then I reached out to this guy, and that's how we got started.
The rest is history.
Okay,
the rest is history, yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. And I know you have an interesting perspective on how you think that DAOs are gradually going to go into the real world, into the physical meat space. This seems to be one of the guiding convictions of how you're building Colony and how you're just thinking about building out this tooling over the long term. I think you tend to agree, but maybe we could have a conversation about that. I mean, because one could say, an Urbit skeptic could say, yeah, sure, Discord is owned by Microsoft, whatever, it's not ideal, but it's fine, it works, and it works now, and it's here, and we don't have to wait for, some long development process on Urbit for some newfangled technology. And if these DAOs are gonna go IRL to real world meetups and real world cities, let's say, maybe the software actually doesn't matter as much, one could say. And so you don't need to build this stuff on Urbit. We'll just go Discord DAOs, go to IRL,
straight to Cloud City,
straight to cities. So maybe you both can help me understand, because it's not obvious to me. Like, what is the link between Urbit, DAOs, and this calling that a lot of people feel towards meat space and towards physical human relationships?
Can I
jump in?
Kick this off here because I'm super contrarian on all this.
Get it?
So I've said this to you before, but I think virtual reality is bullshit. Okay? There's just one reality. The idea that there is a separation between meat space and digital space is a fallacy. All digital space occupies meat space, right? It just in a very concrete way, and that it's in servers somewhere. One hopes nothing bad happens to those servers, but and the users themselves are a place, right? It's just that where they are is in an uncomfortable chair, alone, in a shitty apartment, pouring their life and attention into some centralized software that no one gives a shit about, right? And so DAOs are part of virtual space, and thus physical DAOs are already here. It's just in a very, very sad embodiment, for lack of a better term. And so I think this is like a general thesis of mine, which is that, thought is embodied. How you are, where you live, what you eat, how you sit, how you stand, that all determines how you think, and your thoughts generate the software that you use.
So do you think machinic AGI is bullshit?
Yes, absolutely.
You too?
Without...
Do you also?
Yeah.
Okay, just
the
curious.
Whole thing,
a lot of people, I would say that's
I can go ham on this.
I would say that's a notably popular opinion among Urbit people.
Oh, yeah,
is
for sure.
a skepticism, a strong
AI
skepticism
is a
around
strong Urbit
around
trait.
the like Nick Bostrom, Machinic, AGI.
Just a grift, dude.
Yeah, okay.
It's a great grift, I guess. But I mean, the fact of the matter is,
How is it a grift? Like, how are they grifting
I mean,
off it?
someoans paying those
The future of
people that like
Humanity
fucking
Institute?
have takes, you know.
Yeah, the what is it?
I think it's like the Future of Humanity
Oh,
Institute.
yes.
Yeah.
If you don't pay me, humanity
Yeah,
has no
yeah.
future.
We must think about this.
If you,
Please, give me
if you
millions.
don't pay me, I'm feeding you to the paperclip maximizer.
Exactly.
Pretty much.
I mean, the fact of the matter, I mean, just the whole thing, the hubris of saying that you understand what thought is and you know that it's just information is just, dude. And it's you know what I mean? The whole
Interesting.
thing is.
So is the idea that through Urbit we will create human physical communities that actually manifest true AGI in the terms of embodied collective intelligence? Is that the idea?
Yeah. So
and why Urbit? Like, what is the link between Urbit and why is Urbit a necessary path to getting there?
From my perspective, it's that Urbit is okay. I do think clearly I like computers. It's like I wouldn't be. I mean, if I was full Kaczynski, I would not be doing what I do. So clearly, I like C. I'm a moderate actually.
Yeah.
I'm the moderate resistance or whatever it was called. I think that there is a place for a computerized prosthetic, right? That is subject to the will of the user. And that's what I think Urbit can be. And that needs to be a general purpose computer that is tied to the real, to the identity of the real person. And so, you know, maybe someone could be like, oh, it could be a Docker, and maybe, or whatever. But, you know, but I'm like, I think it has to be a general purpose computer that a user controls. And the thing is like, I don't think if I'm going to have some sort of like prosthetic computer hand, I want it to be a computer hand that I can take apart and understand.
I see. So it sounds like what you're saying is that the ideal optimized human communities that foster true collective intelligence are going to leverage computers.
Yeah.
It's not going to be some back to the land anti-technology thing. What you want is properly engineered computer and networking systems that are aligned with the dignity of human beings.
Precisely, because I think that the ability to coordinate action is one of the single most important things in the history of social movements, right? And if you think about the fact that, and I mean coordinated action among people, dissociating that from geography is the telecommunications revolution, basically. Everything else, who gives a shit? Doesn't matter, right? But the fact that I'm like, yo, dog, I'm thinking this thought. You thinking the same thing? And you live 3 states away, and we can coordinate and share resources and maybe pay one another. That is actually a million times better than some model. Who gives a shit about?
Dude, and it's so crazy to think how technically you can do this on the internet, and yet a terrifyingly small portion of the activity on the internet is doing that.
Exactly.
Right.
So I'm like, and so you think about like the actual what we're talking about is straightforward, and the reason that it doesn't happen a lot of times is one, the way the user conceptualizes the tool is not correct, right? And then the second one is that everything about, I mean, the personal computer has basically been sucked back up into this centralized mainframe type thing. And so basically, when we can have communities based around this kind of stuff, and these communities have to be decentralized, autonomous organizations, you know, whether they're implemented on Urbit or on who knows what kind of, I can't keep track of all these things, then that's really the movement into meat space is the natural. It's not a forced thing. It is the natural outcome of that, and that's why I think that the way Trent approaches this, it's not like he's just following the consequences of how this stuff works, not like superimposing some idea of his
Interesting.
own.
Yeah, and the point I want to bring up with this is the way I see this sort of future world that can be built is it needs to be built like it's sort of like Urbit is this land, right? It's like it's land that you own, and I think that's an important thing because back in the day, like, you know, when you were just serfs and you were servicing some lord, like you didn't own the land. So really, to get to this next level of sort of organization in human society, we needed this innovation of, like, you know, being able to own some land, right? And it was funny because I was reading about was it the Black Plague or something?
Some plague.
Way back in the day. But it was like, I was reading right after that was when the peasant revolt happened.
Yeah.
Right? And that's one of these things where there's a lot of people that got killed in the Black Plague, so they kind of could go to these landowners and be like, hey, like, you got to pay us more, like pay us better wages. So they were like less slavey at that point.
Because the supply of labor decreased. Yeah.
Because the supply of labor decreased. Yeah.
Less slavey. I like that.
It was less slavey, but it was still slavey.
Yeah.
No, but the thing was, is like, you know, and right now we have this sort of thing. I mean, it's not mass death scenario with the pandemic, but I think it's one of these things that's going to do a similar sort of uproar. We sort of see the peasant revolt happening again, where we see it's just like a bunch of people, you know, like, I don't know, like the Zoomers who working at McDonald's are like, we're not working at McDonald's anymore. We're just going to sit back and like, I don't know, maybe they put all their checks, their stipends or whatever
into Doge.
Into Doge, yeah. And then that's what they're doing. But I think that this new innovation is going to be like, you can't have like the equivalent of like internet surf, like the internet surf and lore dynamic that you know we had back in the day, and get to a point where something that's very free can exist. So the corollary is like we used to call like this, you know, what the project we're working on, and we probably, I mean, maybe we'll still codename it Plymouth. And the idea is that it's this digital sort of Plymouth moment. Right.
That's a great name.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
And the reason like it's important is because like there's like this kind of like, you know, religious persecution happening on the internet, or maybe it's political persecution or whatever, right? And we need like this new land to go to, right? Yeah. So we need to sort of, well, like we kind of have it. It's Urbit, but it's undeveloped, right? And so the way we sort of see what we're doing is we're sort of like coming up and saying, hey, here's like some blueprints for like, you know, the Plymouth colony, right? Like, here's a hammer. You want to just fucking hit the hammer and build it. And if we all build it, then we can build this new sort of world. But you can't build it like, because mentioning it earlier, you can't build it on like, you know, Microsoft owned like Discord, or you can't build it on like Google Cloud. Yeah. You know, because at the end of the day, like,
that's rented land.
Yeah, I mean, it's rented land. Like, look at what happened to Parler and some of these things that were sort of like, you know, a little bit on a certain side of the political spectrum. They're just like, you're off. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So as soon as like the state sees like this decentralized emergent state forming,
and they'll find a reason. They'll find a justification. One thing I was going to say about the land thing, right? Because this is a thing that comes up with Urbit a lot. And I think that part of it, I just want to make sure everyone understands what that means. Because I think nowadays we don't understand what land is. Like, this is just a modernity problem. You think it's like some air that you can put your futon in or something, and that's not what land has meant historically, right? When we're talking about peasant revolt, they're not like, can I have a place to stay? You know, can I have a shitty apartment by the side of the freeway? That's not what they meant, right? They wanted land that would be productive land that would basically collect the value of their labor. The more you work land, the more productive it is. The soil accrues value. You build a house, you build a family. It's like land is not a passive space, right? It is a thing that can be productive if cared for. And this is something that like if you're a farmer, you understand this, but I think that the average internet user probably doesn't understand how evocative that metaphor is. And right now, this is the thing that I think, like, as a longtime Urbit user, my ship to me is worth, it's priceless to me. I don't know how better to put it. And that's because I've put in all the effort. I mean, I wasn't thinking about it as effort. It was mostly just shit posting, but it's like, you know, I've accrued a reputation. People know me. I'm part of groups and all this stuff. And so my shit becomes more valuable the more I spend time with it. And that's the thing that I think it's really important to realize. When we're talking about land, like,
that is interesting.
Like, you want a colony partially so that you can reap the benefits of your labor. It's not simply a place to live. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. And you're right. It's so alien, I think, to most people listening to this and watching this, because we've so normalized this culture of like throwaway digital identity.
Yeah, exactly.
It's almost, it takes some effort to appreciate, oh yeah, like a correctly designed permanent digital identity would be an asset that accumulates in value the more value I create with that name, right?
Yeah,
it's almost hard to parse.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we're so used to having a million different logins on a million different websites
Exactly.
that
It's all
disappear
just,
every
it's
few years.
just trash, right? It's
Right.
just fast, basically the Zara equivalent. Zara's not even the worst. H&M equivalent of clothes. And so the thing is, what I think is interesting, and I came up with this metric and we've never been able to use it, which is ransom. The idea being that, like, how much money would you pay to get your ship back if I took it?
Right.
If I kidnapped your ship. And I'd be interested to know people's. I mean, for me, it's like, no one take my shit, please. But it's sort of like, it would be a lot of money.
It's kind of the closest equivalent that many internet users might have would be like if they have a decent following on one particular platform, right?
Yeah.
Like, let's say you've been writing on Twitter for 5 to 10 years and you have, a nice little audience that appreciates your perspective. That might feel like very valuable to you, right? But it kind of sucks that it could just disappear, right?
Exactly,
It's like so it's almost like the best examples we have of what you're talking about are also the greatest exceptions to the rule.
Precisely.
Because if that feels so valuable to you and you appreciate and realize how much value you've accumulated under that name, isn't it kind of just insane? It's insane to go on with this world where it could be pulled away from you at a moment's notice. Maybe for political reasons, but maybe for not even political reasons, just
a
any
mistake.
reasons.
Just
or the company just goes under because technology changes so much, right?
I think you're right, and that's part of the reason why it's going to be this bridge. But another part of it is this idea of permanence, right? So, like, there's this old parable. I forgot, it was a parable Jesus said to, like, someone. I don't know, but it was essentially like, you should build your house on rocks, so don't build it on the sand, right? It's the same sort of thing. Like, don't build your house on the sand. Like, the sand is going to be these platforms that have, like, all these people that come out of a university that has new ideas every 4 years or whatever, and they can have totally different views on things, or it could just be they go under or whatever. And you can't build a civilization on top of something so flimsy, right? So you need something that can last, right? And I think that's the thing with Urbit, is that because everyone can own it, it can last, right? And I think that from that, it's going to enable, like, a totally different mindset in terms of how we can build, like, online communities to start, online, DAO, so decentralized organizations, but then how that transitions into, like, a physical colony where you have, like, 12, 15 families, like, living in this sort of, like, crypto community, or this sort of Urbit community, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can sort of see this transition that can go into that, and just imagine, like, all of the stuff that powers the sort of resource sharing between houses and stuff. All of that would be built on Urbit as well.
So,
right? And that's like that future vision of.
Let's game plan this even more. Let's
sure.
Let's really think about how this will pan out. Because look, I have a group on Urbit, the Other Life group on Urbit. It's active and growing. It's a cool place. And I know a lot of people on Urbit are interested in this. So my buddy Andrew Hitchcock, who also lives in Austin, he just bought. He's an Urbiter, and he just bought 21 acres in about 45 minutes west, specifically because he wants to build, like, a Wrath of Non style village, basically. So there's, like, real interest, real energy, real resources, Urbit aligned, Urbit adjacent, like, eager to move on this kind of thing. So between, let's take the Other Life group as an Urbit group example that's going to be using your tooling to build out a DAO on Urbit. And we can think of, Andrew or someone like that as the IRL kind of endpoint. Let's game out. What are the steps? Like concretely for my audience watching or listening, if I'm going to build this through Colony off to West Texas, what's going to have to happen in what order, and how should people be thinking about this? What should they expect?
So can I do my little CSA?
And keep talking. I'm just going to change something.
I have the like I said, I'm the radical moderate here.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing I was talking to Trent about, it's like back where I live, back in Kansas. I'm a very virtuous guy. I don't know if you knew this. I get all my produce from a CSA, and I get.
You actually live in Kansas?
Yeah.
Do you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
dog. Kansas is cool.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I live in Lawrence.
Nice.
So we get all of our produce from a CSA. We get all of our meat and milk and cheese, eggs and stuff like that from a farm shed, right? And so I think about this a lot. Like if you're going to start your own little community, it's nice to be like, oh, we're just going to have a walled city and we're going to, it's like, no, you're not, bro. It's like you have to have economic relations to supply your little thing. And so
Right.
I think about this like as closed economic relations. Maybe someone who understands economics is a better term. But like, I have suppliers for my needs that aren't a store. Right? There are people with whom I have a relationship that I prepay, and it's in their advantage because they can bank on that income and stuff like that. So this to me is actually kind of the next step is you have like a group of people that decides they want to live together, right? But they need supplies from the outside world or whatever. So they establish relationships, economic relationships with suppliers from the surrounding area that maybe aren't members of this community, but can rely on that community for some amount of income, right? And since we're moving to basically full integration of Bitcoin, of Ethereum, whatever crypto you want to use with your Urbit, with your group, you're talking about being able to basically enter into these closed economic relations with other real world actors, which is how you get into the thing where like, okay, well, we're going to set up a private school for our kids to go to. We're going to get all of our produce from this farm. Heck, let's actually buy a share of that farm so that we can, and then you can start moving into this thing where you're establishing economics.
You guys are getting farther and farther.
Sorry.
Bringing it, yeah.
It's just the takes.
Yeah, I know.
It's just like you're establishing essentially like an economic. Because this is the thing that you realize with Amazon and shit like that is that like actually how people get hard commercial goods. The distribution of these things is very important, right?
Yeah.
And so establishing that and allowing your physical DAO, your IRL DAO, to basically enter into closed economic relationships with trusted partners who, of course, you could encourage to also be on Urbit, right? Then that's, I think, kind of like the first step there.
Interesting.
And that doesn't require us moving to a walled city, in the tropics, which would be cool. But
so step one is like, so the Other Life group starts getting like other businesses that we buy things from, we get them on Urbit, and then like our buying contracts are run through Urbit. You think that's like the base layer?
I want the Other Life DAO to have a symbiotic relationship with a
supplier.
A supply DAO, right? Like
right.
I'm the wool DAO. I'm the
farmer
meat DAO. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so you have symbiotic relationships, and then you are. because the thing is like money's great. Don't get me wrong. I love money, but the thing is you can't eat money.
Yeah.
And you need to, and I think really lasting economic relationships which will allow you to weather storms are based on trust. And trust is something you can build with a permanent identity. You cannot build trust with a whole bunch of like anon weirdos that are Ethereum addresses on the internet. I'm sorry.
And a bunch of bored ape avatars.
Yeah. It's just like no matter how bored that ape is. Do you see what I'm saying? So this is kind of my like mini LARP. I'm like, this is like, to me, that actually doesn't seem that far away. Buying raw milk with crypto is not that far away. Like we're there.
Right.
Okay. And anyway, he can take you.
Yeah. What are your thoughts?
The future though.
I mean, so I'll start with like the more tangible, like short term, and really the goal is with the people that you sort of come together with online, like finding a way to sort of build some sort of economic stability between those people, so that when it comes time to like start thinking about like, oh, let's buy, let's pull our capital and buy like 40 acres or whatever, we can start, building some stuff out there. And I'm sure there'll be people that are, building some sort of like, kind of model homes around these ideas. So architects on Urbit, reach out.
Yeah.
Lomder-librun. Also farmers.
Yes.
I'll put your @p in the corner of the video.
Perfect.
And in the show notes.
But so it's about getting sort of this economic stability within the DAO, in the digital space. And then once you get to that point, you could then start transitioning with pieces into the physical space. Like it doesn't even have to be like, you don't have to build like the walled city at, that first version. Like you could, rent out an office space, right? And have like a shared office space for that DAO, right? You can do things like that are like, you could have like a, some sort of like lodge style thing where you just like have this physical instantiation that isn't fully like living in an off the grid
like
community.
the other life group could just like rent a small room in Austin somewhere.
Honestly,
and it
Other
could
Life Gentlemen's Club.
Yeah, like having a cigar lounge or something. You just go in. Yeah,
and it could be collectively owned by at the DAO.
Yeah,
basically.
Yeah. So there's ways you can get your feet wet without having to like build a new civilization or whatever. But like obviously the long term is you kind of want a way to grow this next stage of civilization where you have like a lot of this decentralized stuff coordinated through, probably some, one of the Akbar helixes, or something like that, right? Like, or another blockchain, but you would have all this coordination happening. But in this future state, you could imagine like, this Kansas community or whatever that, you're going to be building, Anthony. And then they'll be like a community. Anthony Dow. Anthony to Kansas Dow. What does Kansas do? Like corn? Or like what do they do over there?
Bro, come on. It's the sunflower state.
Oh, sunflowers.
Wheat.
Okay,
wheat.
Okay. Wheat,
cotton.
Dow.
Man,
Okay,
we make this country run.
But like, so then you have, another community that is maybe in Florida and they produce oranges, but they don't produce oranges in Kansas. So like, you'll have these sort of relationships that can start forming that are sort of abstracted away from the local political situation. So it's going to be this interesting world that I think we're going to be diving into over the next 5-10 years. And I think it can only happen on Urbit. Like we could only do this on something that, can't be taken down off on like AWS or whatever, right? So it needs to be something you own. It needs to be something that can be trusted. It needs to be something that, we're going to be getting this awesome blockchain, like tightly integrated into the whole ecosystem. I think all of those pieces are kind of vying for making this future possible on Urbit. And I think that the future of this is going to be like very exciting and we just have to go for it.
You just got me thinking, what if the Branch Davidians at Waco had Urbit? Like, would it have...
This is not official Urbit.
No, just saying, think it through. Like, would it have played out differently? How would it have played out?
So I actually don't know that much about the Branch Davidians. I mean, it's interesting to think, though, that, that's an interesting question, right? Because I actually don't know what the core of the dispute was.
It was
guns.
Guns. Yeah, they were stockpiling guns.
Yeah. So
and maybe stuff involved with the women and children being.
But I always felt like
abused.
there was like sort of post hoc rationale for some of this.
Yeah, it's very debated. Yeah. Of course, I'm just saying what they would have said.
What I would say is that, intentional communities exist. They always have existed, right? And they still exist. And generally, there's better and worse ways to run them, right? I think any of these things, be they digital or real, relations with the sort of ambient society have to be a priority. So it's like if you, and that's just sort of a generic statement, but I think what happens when a lot of this stuff kind of falls apart, it's because you're doing crazy. It's just like, you know what I mean? It's like Osho or it's like, dude, why? It's like you actually were okay until you like took it too far. Right. And so I think it's like, if I think about
but who's to say what's too far?
Well, you only know
we're freedom lovers. We're freedom lovers, right?
Well, freedom and stupidity are not necessarily the same thing. But I do think that like what is interesting though is that Branch Davidianism, right? Which I actually looked at this up. It's actually pretty fucking interesting. So it has to do with the 104, the 144,000.
Remind me.
There's like in the Book of Revelations. You didn't know you were going to get this podcast listener. In the Book of Revelations, there's basically part of the revelation is that there's like 144,000 righteous that are whatever. I forget.
Nice, that's a lot.
It's pretty. It's more than you think.
It's optimistic.
That's like the city of Wichita Falls, Texas. And so, and then there's another one where it's the iron rod of David, I think is what the Davidianism is. Anyway, be that as it may, he had this belief system. So it's interesting to think that belief system, if he had better information technology, could it have become like a cyber sect?
Right.
And then just obviate the need for all the guns and the compounds and all that.
That's an interesting perspective.
So,
what I would no, that's I don't know. That's totally plausible. What I was thinking was that if in a way, the Branch Davidians and groups like that, they feel like they have to go down in a blaze of glory.
Yeah. There's a lot of that shit.
The reason they feel like one of the reasons that they feel like they have to go down in this blaze of glory, why they have to stick to their guns, literally, right, is because they have a genuine and I think correct sense that if they were to give up on that house, on that piece of land and disband, it would be over.
Yeah.
Whereas if all of their relationships were through Urbit ships, and through a kind of DAO system, right? If all of the members of the Branch Davidian sect at Waco had all of their economic and social logic in an Urbit network, arguably they would have been less concerned and they would have been able to walk away from the property when the FBI showed up, or they would have been able,
because it won't cease to exist.
Exactly.
Right?
Because they could easily reconstitute it somewhere else if they needed to.
And isn't that's really fascinating to think about. And like, I'd like to say Urbit is the only way to do this. It's really not, right? I mean, like, it's sort of like, what if Branch Davidianism was just an email list? What if that guy had a Substack?
But it might be unique because the FBI would arguably possibly be able to coordinate with the other authorities and the big tech platforms to shut them down.
Would
right?
David Koresh's Substack been able to?
Obviously not. No, obviously. No, this is really this is really relevant and fair.
Really
like, obviously, at the time when Waco was kicking off, had they had a digital technology, a digital community of any kind on any big tech platform, of course they would be taken off.
The first thing they would have done.
Of course they would genuinely, because David Koresh is in that moment was certainly worse and more of a danger than someone like Alex Jones, on whom they were able to have coordinated big tech cancellation.
That's a really good point.
It actually might have had to have been Urbit.
Yeah.
Not that I'm a big David Koresh fan or anything.
I mean, I think in general though, it's like this subject, right? I mean, we're basically talking about intentional communities, right?
Yeah.
That's like a term.
That sounds like boomer though.
No, but it does. But it's sort of like we shouldn't be. I mean, I think this is one of the big mistakes that people make when they're doing futuristic shit is that they're unwilling to learn from the recent past. And I don't want to do that.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm just like, dude.
Totally. Yeah.
And so, like, and that's why I'm down with intentional communities. Like, and so there's a lot of prior art there, and there's a lot of people who have done it, have tried, and I think it's important to bring that up,
Totally.
I feel like the zeitgeist, our time is about reinventing the fucking wheel.
In a way,
the thing is like, don't reinvent. We got a lot of stuff to do. Do not spend it reinventing the wheel.
In a way, Osho did it kind of the best, like it really powerfully and effectively.
Osho. What's crazy about Osho is that he wasn't called Osho. He was called some other thing.
Okay, yeah, I don't know.
But he did all that shit, rebranded, came back as Osho, and is now. You can't kill Osho.
Did he? I didn't
So
actually know
Osho's
that.
like his second incarnation as whatever this.
But if you watch that documentary, like they did actually like take over cities effectively. They took over the governance of cities. I think like quite an impressive amount of space. It wasn't just like a house like the Waco people.
Well, and so I think what's interesting, and this is the other thing that I think if you want to be successful, you have to be willing to learn from people that you may disagree with. Do you know what I mean? It's I'm not into whatever Osho's selling, but the thing is,
but
like,
you want to get what they got right as far as possible, as much as possible.
Exactly. And it's just, so it's sort of like you got to be kind of cold when you're looking at this stuff because you don't know where you're going to find lessons.
Totally. You have any thoughts on any of this? I know we kind of got crazy here.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think the way I see it is more so in alignment with like the Hutterite communities of Alberta and those regions. So they're sort of like this group that's not really Amish. Like they're not Amish in that they don't like technology. They have technology to do these things, but they're like these small communities of like 200 or so people that they just do a lot of chickens. Like they have chicken farms. But like if you go into
chicken DAO,
it's like a chicken DAO. No, but it's like if you go anywhere in Alberta, you come across these chickens. They're really naturally raised for your range, all this stuff. Anyways, but they have these communities like spread around in Canada, and they sort of exist in their own sort of microcosm. So they're still like tightly bound to the local economies.
Yeah.
Right. So they're like they're paying their taxes, they're doing all this things. So it's like for any of these things to work, you have to sort of like feed all of the local ecosystems.
Yeah.
That is the political ecosystems with tax dollars to some extent. You're going to have to, integrate in other ways. So maybe you're producing crafts. Maybe there's some people that can. So I think it's got to be one where it's sort of like not like the Koresh sort of thing where it's like sort of just wall off.
Yeah.
Right. You're walled off. You're sort of this thing outside of town. Everyone's like, what's going on over there?
Yeah.
It's like got to be this thing that's very sort of inviting and very much
Yeah.
ingrained with the local.
And in the States, at least in Kansas and the surrounding states, the Mennonites are like that. So it's like, like a lot, they do a lot of eggs and farming and stuff like that. And they're known for the quality of their produce. And and that's a really interesting thing, because it's sort of like they are somewhat separate, but they're not like, there's no walled, it's not like a compound or anything, so.
Yeah. So I think it's got to be done in that realm. I think there's a lot of people that are like, they're like Bitcoin citadels, man. We're going to just go build these walls and the peons can stay outside while the collapse happens and we'll stand with our armed guards. But it's like, that's not the way. I don't think that's the way that this future becomes good for
I think
people.
it's also historically never happened. It's like the idea that, there's always sort of relationships with people on your border, even if that border is just a conceptual border, intellectual border, there's always this back and forth, and this idea that it's just going to be Bitcoin fortress. Like, it's just like, dude, it's just not real.
Well, you know who did a good job? The Mormons did a bang up job. They kind of got a whole state.
Yeah.
Right. So I wonder if
they paid a pretty high price though. The Mormon wars were pretty gnarly.
For sure. I just wonder.
I don't want to no Urbit wars.
I wonder if Urbit IRL communities should, the Urbit monasteries or the Urbit, whatever people are calling them, however it gets materialized. I wonder if people should be thinking about kind of integrated, kind of almost governmental operations with current, like to take over a whole state or something like that through a kind of slow, gradual network building or something like that.
I think about that, like even talking about taking stuff over. It's like, you don't really want to use those terms, right?
Yeah, I don't mean
really. What you want to do is you want to lobby on your own behalf, right? And it's funny. I was at the Bitcoin developer meetup yesterday. And there was a guy there who was talking about sort of like his efforts with the Texas legislature to, I don't know, whatever they were trying to push forward. But that's really good. Like that's a really good way to think about it. And I think that's great that they do that and they think like that, because I think that's really what you're talking about. Like, you just want to make sure that the ambient society is friendly to your interests. Like, I don't really want to like take over, the housing and human development, whatever the heck it's called. You don't want to do that. You want them to like not bum you out.
Let's send some updates to people out there who are listening or watching from the developer perspective, because a lot of people might think it's kind of insane that someone would even be building a startup on Urbit, when a lot of people are thinking like, they don't even want to spend the 5 minutes. They don't even want to spend the 5 minutes it takes to like get an Urbit planet and boot up their ship. Yeah. Right. So the idea, I think a lot of people, especially developers and engineers, we have a fair number of those in my audience. We have a pretty sophisticated audience, are probably thinking like, how on earth would someone come to the decision to build a startup on this technology that is seen as so kind of distant and undeveloped and high risk? So walk us through that a little bit, and specifically share some details on like how things are going, because you're hard at work, at the moment. So just share a bit on that.
Yeah. So I think one of the things you're sort of hitting on is like, Hoon is a totally new language. It's kind of foreign to some extent. Like things, represented in binary trees. It's slightly different than what people are used to. This runic language versus one that's says what things are. So so it's something like it's almost like this esoteric language that you're getting into. So when you don't see a path, like you have to really be like into it to like jump in prior to seeing a path to like software distribution and things like that. So for me, it was like there's a moment when I was watching on stage and I saw the ease at which an app was published, right? It was just like, it worked on my thing and I push it out. And I could start seeing this, it was almost like it unlocked this 20 years down the line sort of view of what this would be. And how if we get started today, even though it's super early and we're one of the first companies trying to build on this, once there's a few milestones that are hit with Urbit, like the L2's released one day, and all of these things start opening up, right? So we're going to have new DAO, a unified DAO experience on there. People are going to be able to go through this L2 very easy onboarding path. I don't think this like I think in a year, no one's going to be asking like, "Whoa, you're crazy for doing this." Like, why are you doing this? I think it's going to be one of those things where it's like this rush is starting. Like, I think this year is the year that the fire is going to light beyond the Urbit community.
Okay, interesting. So you're kind of just making a wager on that. That's how you see it, and you're compelled by that. And talk a little bit more in detail about the technical experience, because I mean, I know a good number of very good engineers, really sophisticated engineers, who still say to me, "I'm never going to learn this stupid language. I just don't know." Like, no, they just say no. And so how did
Philistines.
you? So yeah, I mean, what are they missing? Are they kind of more concerned and intimidated than they need to be, or how should people think about it?
Well, it's interesting because me and one of our backend developers, we both sort of hit this moment when we were going through in learning Hoon, where you're just like, why the hell are you doing? Why does this work like this? And you're like, get to this moment where it's almost like you're kind of like, you kind of have this thing like, why are we doing this? So you're like pissed off. And then there's a moment that you come to where you start getting it, right? So it's like, there's this like dark path you have to walk down.
The dark night of the soul.
It's the dark night of the soul, yeah, pretty much. But the developer dark night. And once you get through it, you start seeing this light, and you start, getting the full flow of I just poked this from a UI, and it's going and storing something in Graph Store. And once you unlock that full, for me, it's all about unlocking that full flow. Once you understand what's happening along the way for that full flow, you understand how to do these common tasks that you would do in other languages. Once you have those skills, those patterns understood, you can start building on top of it.
I mean, as someone who talks to founders a lot, I mean, do you have a line on this? How do you think about that? How do you communicate this?
Well, a lot of the people that I deal with are already zealots.
Sure.
So I actually don't sell Hoon a lot. I had a similar experience, and I actually think it's just the experience of learning Hoon. But one thing that we're doing on the foundation side, we hired a guy to work just on developer experience and basically improve that whole thing. Because one misconception, I think, is the benefits of developing on Urbit really accrue when you don't think about Hoon. Hoon is a language you'll never use anywhere else. So a lot of developers are trying to be what's the use of learning Hoon? Because I can't, use it somewhere else and put it on your LinkedIn. You probably get banned or something, And so I think, but they're missing the point somewhat. So the real benefit is not a programming language. It's the operating system as a whole and how Hoon interacts with everything on the system.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's not like I'm writing a Python program on my Mac. It's like if you're programming your whole operating system. Does that make sense?
Totally.
And so learning Hoon in isolation is kind of well, this is kind of weird and dumb, right? Well, some people like it just because it's a kind of a brain fuck. Sorry, this is a family show.
No.
But so I think basically reframing it such that developers understand it's this is how you can program your Urbit, not how you learn Hoon. And Hoon is a tool that you use to do that. And so we're trying to kind of reorient the developer experience stuff towards that. Because once you can poke something, which is just basically a command to an application, and see its effect. You just, oh shit, you can connect the dots, And
Right.
so getting people to that stage instead of learning the language in isolation, because
Right.
who cares, right?
Well, I think what you're getting at is when you're building apps on Urbit, you don't have to create your own database. You don't have to create your own graph. You don't have to.
Which is hard for people to believe.
Yeah,
Actually,
right.
I mean, so they're what? It's just app is just
right.
this many.
You just plug into this already existing database and social graph. And so maybe you could explain in detail for people, when you were thinking about when you're speccing out your software that you're building on Urbit, how much harder would it have been to do outside of Urbit? What give us an example of the trade-offs involved and when you were that really made you see oh, wow, this would actually be easier to do on Urbit for X, Y, and Z.
Well, if we were trying to do this in the traditional development path, you'd probably, you'd spin up a database on some AWS cloud or something like that, right? And then you would have to build an API layer that essentially has business logic that will translate what's going on in the UI. So the UI will hit this thing in the middle, and you're writing it there. And it's this thing that translates all that to these database calls, essentially. So you're building all these layers that kind of do the same thing, and you just keep doing that over and over and over and over again.
And that's a
Every
centralized
project.
version. If you try to do it on a
that's
decentralized
version.
yeah.
If you're trying to do it in a centralized peer-to-peer one, it's like, it's even harder because then you have to somehow manage the IP addresses from these different devices and all that. So there's like a huge level of complexity if you're doing it at peer-to-peer. But just coming from a centralized development experience, it would have taken a lot of work to put these pieces together. But when we started getting into the developing goal agents and stuff, it was you just had a few files that you had to define. Right? You had your structure file, you've got your lib file. We had a graph validation file. We got sort of our app agent, and there was just a handful of files, and the logic in that was fairly straightforward. And it I think it's the thing where it takes a while to get used to it, but once you're used to it, you can start churning it out really fast. There's always
That's
a
what
lot
Logan tells me.
Because there's always a lot of upfront work in getting all the tools together and getting all the AWS set up and getting all the stuff set up in the traditional development world. And it's always the same upfront grind work. But with Urbit, it's once you understand the structure, then it's just boom, you could jump in and start making an app. It's if I want to make a task management app, like a little Trello, it's just I could probably do that in a week or less if I just sat down and wanted to do it. So it unlocks this thing once you get to the point of sort of competence. And I think that's the key to it.
No, those are some good
it's funny
details.
because when you do regular app development, people forget that the boring shit of signing up, having a user database, it just takes a lot of time.
And then the CI/CD process that you set up,
Exactly.
and it automates the deployment and versions.
Yeah, and so it's one of those things where it's that's never in the mocks. People are oh, this is not. Well, let's talk about logging in. What if you lose your password? What if it's all that shit? It's just all gone, and you try to do that in a pseudonymous, decentralized way. Well, good luck.
Well, I think this was awesome, guys. We covered a lot of ground. I don't know if there's anything else you really wanted to sneak in, but I think that was awesome. We covered some futuristic shit. We covered some nitty-gritty details as well. So I think there's a lot here for the audience, and I really enjoyed this.
Boom.
So for people out there listening, I'm giving away planets, Urbit planets, once L2 ships. So there's a waiting list. If you just go to imperceptible.computer, that I will give all listeners of the show a free Urbit planet. I might, if you're listening to this in 2 years, maybe I might have to add a modest fee at some point. But at the moment, at the time this episode drops, just get on the waiting list and I'll hook you up. So yeah, it's exciting times, man. Exciting times on the Urbit network. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it.
You'll put our Pat P's in the show
notes.
notes.
I'll put your Pat P's in the show notes so you can reach out to Anthony or Trent and connect with all of us on the network. Yeah.
Come say hi.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. And thanks to Assembly Capital for having us.